There's a lot of frustration and depression like that doesn't ever get revealed. So whereas in Korea, I think people are always talking about it. Like people are always like, oh, our society's so depressed, like we're failing. Whereas in Japan, I think people don't talk about it, and then it's like, oh, a guy jumped out the window.
When you mentioned, gender relations and all of that, I get it's teens, right? It's not, you're not talking about adult, people getting married and all of that. You've spent your time here in the US since sort of from your college age. But did you notice any dynamics even at like a, kids, teenager level, differences between like how boys and girls would interact with each other?
Yeah, I mean, again, I went to an American school, so it wasn't like I was directly involved with the culture there, but I would always hear things said about how Chinese men are very nice to their wives. So I would always hear adults joke around like, oh, you should marry like a Chinese guy because he will always like put you first. Whereas in Korea, I think we've more recently had like there's a lot of gender conflict there because the women have very recently gained like their freedom as like the equal gender, which is why like the men are very unsatisfied with the things that are happening. But I think I only have a very superficial understanding of everything because...
That's totally fine. Yeah, no, I'm just going off of like what your personal experience was, not like this is true in all cases. Like, of course.
But because I think recently in China, there's been a big online movement of feminism happening. So I think that what I've heard and what I've heard on a superficial level is definitely not accurate because women are recently standing up for themselves, reporting how men suck in China.
Right, sure.
Every country has to go through the men suck era.
It's a rite of passage. How developed is your society? Well, or if women are saying that men suck openly, you're becoming more developed.
And Korea, on the other hand, we have like one of the lowest like marriage rates as well. Our birth rate is one of the lowest in the world.
It's like maybe even the lowest in the world.
I think it's like 0.7 something like that.
I think it's the lowest in the world now. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got lots of problems to solve, and I think one of them is like I think politicians kind of played a part in that as well, like trying to appeal to a specifically male demographic or a specifically female demographic, and I think that's kind of worsened the conflict between two genders, which is absurd because like why would that doesn't even make sense. But I think in real life people are normal, but then when you go online, people would say such hateful things about the other gender, which is absurd. I don't know what exactly is the way to fix this, but it's just a recent thing that's been going on.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the same case here, honestly. There's a whole like it's kind of started, and we don't have time to get into the whole like the war between the genders that seem to have just exploded on the internet, especially in like the US, but Western countries, but also Korea now is on the list too. Don't know about Japan, no idea. But you said China, there's a growing wave of online feminism.
Yeah, I think people have compared it to like the 70s in America when people started like standing up for like feminist movements and things. We'll see how long like it goes because a movement in China is very hard to persist under government control. But yeah, I think that's been happening from what I've heard, even though I'm not in there anymore. I've always had a positive view of Japan, especially because I like the culture. Like I'm a big anime fan, all of that. And I really like how clean everything is, like it's nice. But then recently, I think there was like a suicide case at my sister's dorm. And things like that happening, like it kind of shows you how like there's a lot of frustration and depression like that doesn't ever get revealed. So whereas in Korea, I think people are always talking about it. Like people are always like, oh, our society's so depressed, like we're failing. Whereas in Japan, I think people don't talk about it, and then it's like, oh, a guy jumped out the window.
That same idea of spectrum of in Japan they don't talk about it at all. Korea, they'll talk about it, but there is still major issues with suicide over. I always associate it with sort of academic performance and jobs are the big drivers of it, but at least people are talking about it, which is good. China, I would imagine the suicide rate is lower. I mean, I don't actually know. We can probably look that up, but I mean, obviously there are major issues with people killing themselves over, depression and, this happens in general, but the stats, my understanding, are lower in China as far as we know.
That would make sense. sense.
And you know, when you describe it as like, at least in daily life, there's a lot more people who can just kind of, they just go about their lives,
Right.
and they're not, they can say what they think a bit more, again, as long as it's not about the government, but they also, right, aren't killing themselves academically the same way that people in Japan and South Korea are at all levels of society.
Yeah, I think it's just like the side effect of like recent developed countries.
Yeah.
We get so much information, like we're always inundated with information on social media. We have so many opinions on like so many spectrums of politics and all of that. So I think in some sense like that just makes you mentally unhealthier.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think leaving some of that out, of course that's like, if it's breaching your freedom, that's not good. Right. But again, like there's that ironic like pro of like, you don't have to like worry about it as much.
Yeah. It's like you live in a country that controls everything that happens, so you're just gonna kind of like, well, it's not our, we're just gonna kind of go along with whatever we have to do. And yeah, there's none of the political stuff too, because you live in a one-party state.
Right.
So
I mean, there's political issues all the time, but like that's you can't know about it.
You can't know about it, of course, which is that's another question. But because I think even in the U.S., like suicide rates have been going up, and I think social media is a huge factor in that. Because like it does kind of make you go crazy, and there's a whole thing about that. Do you want to talk at all about when you got to the U.S. and your time in America and how that factored into kind of your upbringing?
I think my vision of like why I wanted to go to America was because I always thought that would be the place I would fit in. Because I've always grown up between cultures. I've never quite felt like I belonged somewhere. And in my view of America, I always had like this utopian like vision of like the people of different cultures and backgrounds like getting along with each other. I almost imagined it to be like I would be reliving the experience I had in Malaysia when I used to attend an international school there. And I was so shocked to find out, I don't know why this was so shocking to me, but that America itself is actually a country. So like when I came to college...
What do you mean by America is what do you mean by that?
I always imagined it as like a conglomeration of different cultures and backgrounds, whereas there's clearly still something that's American, obviously.
Oh yes, okay,
right.
Okay. Oh, so you viewed it almost like a Star Trek style, like human people
Different
just
people
kind of show up here.
together.
Yeah, and there's not even a local culture. It's just like it's like Los Angeles. You know?
It's like, what's even an American cuisine? Like,
right.
It's not real.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of thoughts actually about American cuisine, which is. We can talk about that if you want to, but no, please continue. This is fascinating.
Yeah.
I want to hear.
So I was very shocked. I think it's especially because when I first came to school, my first week of school, it was all American kids, and it was my first time in America. I knew nothing about like what people say and do here.
This is USC.
This is USC.
Okay, yep.
And we were like sitting in a circle, introducing ourselves, and everyone was saying like all these different cities in the Bay Area.
Yes.
Everyone was just like the Bay Area.
Yes.
I'm from the Bay Area. I'm like, I didn't know there were so many variations of the Bay.
Yes.
So like that was when my utopian vision of like America kind of shattered. Like, and everyone was like talking about the same like cultural experience of like going to high school here and all of that. And for some reason that was like so shocking to me because that was not what I thought I would be walking into. And I think it's especially because I was raised on a pseudo-American environment because I went to an American international school.
Right.
So for the whole time that I lived in China, I always thought I was getting exposed to American culture. But then when I actually moved here, like the real American culture is obviously different from the American culture that I was raised on in China. So that was a lot. It was very shocking. It was very hard to get adjusted from the beginning. And I still think I get along better or have more connections with people who are not from America, like who had experience abroad. But yeah, that took some adjusting because it was so different from what I expected.
So now I have to know, what was this pseudo-American world that was being, I don't want to say taught to you, but that you were feeling like you were living in your American school? You mentioned a little bit of this utopian Star Trek, just a colony of humanity with no local culture.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Like my high school or like...
Yeah, just that sense of like, here's what I imagined America was beyond utopian global colony.
I think I just imagined this as my international school from Malaysia.
Okay.
Where it was like bunch of different countries, different cultures. We celebrate like every religious holiday.
Yeah, right, okay.
Like everyone is very respectful of like each person's culture. Everyone comes from a different religious background.
Sure.
It's like a lot of diversity.
Sure.
But then when I actually went to college, there was not that much diversity. Even with people like who look different or from different races, I think growing up in California is pretty much like a very homogenous experience.
Yes, that's a not to get into like hot takes here, but I think I don't mean even this in a political way. That's a topic that I certainly am starting to feel myself, and I think a lot of other people are as well, which is that. And I think especially in California, this is true, where there's such a focus on the diversity of people's backgrounds and ancestry in terms of like this country and this religion and this like your skin color is this and your whatever. But there's actually increasingly very little diversity of like opinion or thought, and it's becoming this very sort of ideologically homogenous sense of like, here are the views that are acceptable. If you view anything that other than that, that is unacceptable. You are not being inclusive.
Right.
And then we'll just be like, diversity. And like,
and that's exactly how I felt about people looking different, but they all kind of feel the same.